Good afternoon. Good afternoon, people. I wanted to take a little few minutes here to talk about and to give back what I believe to be the genius of Irish people, right? And that genius is captured in a concept known as a gasa, Geasa, right? Pardon the pronunciation. Shame on me for not having for not being as fully equipped with the use of the mother tongue as I should have been, as I would have been had I been born many moons ago, right? But a gasa, I call it a gasa, plural, and a gas or guess, Geis, right? And that was a sacred taboo or an obligation that's placed on individuals, particularly kings, right? And an example of that is in Irish mythology. And again, the genius is captured in this because these stories are naturally pre-Christian. Okay, so they're at least 1600 years old, but more than likely at least 2000 years old. And nobody knows. The beauty of Irish history, prehistory, mythology, if you want to call it that, is that nobody knows and nobody can say for certain how old these stories are. People can say, look, well, they were written down in the 6th century or they were first transcribed in the 11th, 10th, 11th, 12th century. Fine. But they were in existence long before that. And the fact that you see so many what would be called pagan elements, right? We'll just call them Irish elements, naturally tells you that they predate Christianity. And they predate Christianity by such a period of time that they had the space, right, to become incredibly sophisticated and all-encompassing in terms of the humanities, right? So the capturing of psychology, philosophy, morality, whatever you want to call it, right? The animism, right? The animation of the natural world around us, right? It's totally in contradistinction or separateness from Christianity, right? Where the attention is channeled outward and upward, if you will, right? In pre-Christian thought in Ireland, it wasn't so much. It was channeled horizontally instead of vertically, okay? And inwardly instead of outwardly. So the gasa, a taboo or an obligation, right? And an example of them is with Nuada, right? The first king of the Tuatha Danann, right? These ethereal beings, if you will, right? These people who came to Ireland and ruled over Ireland. And Nuada was the king. And one of the gases on him, if not kingship itself, right, was that if you were blemished in some way, in the story he loses an arm, so he has to abdicate his throne because he's imperfect now. And while the injury itself is explained to us as a physical injury, it doesn't mean that the blemish was limited to physicality, right? So it could also be a moral blemish. And you go on to see this in Nuada's replacement, Bray or Brez, right? He is selfish, greedy. He lacks vision, right? He lacks imagination. He lacks creativity because he uses his throne and kingship to just serve himself, right? And he puts great people like the Dagda or Ogma, who are capable of many feats and magical actions, right? And undertakings. He has them doing the most menial of tasks, right? So as a king, he's not getting the best out of the people that he's there to serve, right? And lead. So, and there's satire made up about him. He's ridiculed and mocked, and songs are made of him, and jokes are made of him. And as is the Irish way, again, we can see pass through the mist of time, right? So thousands of years ago, humor is the pinnacle, right? That's how you get rid of treacherous kings, right? Is by mocking and ridiculing them. Thousands and thousands of years old. We still do that today. Fascinating, right? So that's the genius I think of Irish storytelling and Irish mythology and the Irish mind, right? The Irish soul, the Irish spirit, if you will. There's a genius to it that's peculiar to Ireland or to Irish people. Separate the two you cannot, right? Now, what's interesting when you're reading Irish mythology is how off-putting it seems to be at first, right? Because we're used to reading literal stories, right, or that follow a sequence and that follow a certain logic, okay? And I think this is a result of Christianity. I'm not knocking it, right? But there's a cause and effect to certain things, right? And certain things come into being and they stand the test of time for a while. But there's certain tendencies that coalesce around a particular belief system. And with Christianity, we all know this, right? It is that the word of the Bible is literal. We take it literally, that Jesus is literally the Son of God, and God literally incarnated into this one man, right? We take it literally. But that was not always the case, right? And if you ever want the shining example of understanding when there's a time for taking things literally and there's a time when you should probably take things a little bit more figuratively, then reading Irish mythology is certainly one of the many, many oak doors you can open on that road, right? And I'll give you an example of this, okay? So there's many characters in many of our stories that have these gasa. And one of them, hang on now, and I find him, is Connor Moore. And when you're reading this, it's pretty easy to put the book away and just go, what is this? Right? And prior to this, then you might read some of the stories of Keane, right, where he's fleeing from the sons of Tyrone, right, three enemies that always fight. Two sets of three brothers always fight, and there's always conflict between them when they meet. And Keane, one of the brothers, is on his own, and he sees these three sons of Tyrone coming across the field. And in order to try and get away from them, right, he turns into, there's a herd of pigs, or whatever you want to call it, right, there's a load of pigs there. He turns into one of them, and then one of the other brothers turns into a greyhound and chases the pig away, and then they find out that pig is actually Keane, so they kill him. What's going on, right? Are the Irish people, did we believe this stuff? Is this what we've seen? Is this the world that we swam in, this dream world? Is that the way we lived and the way we imagined and perceived things? Magical thinking, right? Is that what was going on there? Or were we talking metaphorically? And if we were speaking metaphorically, then what did these animals represent, right? What did these things represent, where we turned into certain things, or certain inanimate objects spoke to us in a very human way? What is the message that's being relayed there, right? So Conor Moore he's a High King of Ireland. He had his gasa, right? So taboos and obligations, so things you cannot do in this role, or things you must do in this role. And if you do the things that you shouldn't do, then misfortune will fall on you and the land around you if it is the king's role that you're in. So a few of these things that he's not allowed to do, right, and some are kind of self-explanatory and others are a little bit more peculiar. And I think it's the peculiarity and the seeming nonsense of these gasa, some of them anyway, that highlight the genius that I'm speaking of. Because I get to it, right? But here's one. So, not allowing a single woman to enter his house after sunset. Okay, fair enough. Not permitting plunderers in his realm. Okay, he needs to be a protector. And not an adulterer, right? Not entering a house with a fire smoke visible or a red glow. What is that, right? Not travelling rightwards or clockwise around Tara or leftwards around Bregia. And not hunting the birds of Connacht Lane as they are his kin, right? So what's going on here? Some of them, as I said, are self-explanatory, right? So not allowing a single woman to enter his house after sunset, right? So if you're going to be a king and a leader, you can't be destroying your reputation by engaging in things that others might look at unfavorably, right? So not permitting plunderers in his realm. Obviously, if you cannot be said to be the high king or a king or a leader of your men, if you're permitting people to plunder and rob off your people, it's self-defeating, right? So you cannot be said to be in any way a symbol of strength for your people if you are also a symbol of weakness by allowing this to happen under your watch, right? And I think the peculiarity of some of these, like, so you're not allowed to hunt certain birds from this area, you're not allowed to watch birds fly on your own, is another one of them. The peculiarity, I think, highlights the expectations that would be put on certain kings. And I think this is far more interesting than, we'll take the 10 Commandments, for example, right? Here's the 10 things that you should or shouldn't do, okay? And it's the same for everybody. The seeming randomness of these, peculiar to Conor Moore, and again, they differ depending on which character you're meeting in these stories, is that there's a recognition from the Irish people that each king is going to have his own shortcomings and his own strengths. And that in order for this guy to be able to rule effectively, it is incumbent on the people that know him. And there's other instances where kings will sit down and eat at a table, right? And the English, there's a few stories where the English would have looked at it as peculiar that the Irish kings would sit with their servants or anybody amongst their people, right? The English people would have looked at that as a kind of a taboo, a breaking of the hierarchy, whereas in Ireland it seemed that the hierarchy was far more loose, okay, and fluid. The stratification of the class system was not adopted at certain times, right? So the opportunity for each person of the tribe to know the king was available. And it was so important to know and understand the king's character, because in order for him to accept the role of the king, he had to accept these gasa being imposed on him. Here is the list of things that you cannot do. We know where you can fall down, and we know where you can destroy the role and the honor of the role that you're taking. We know how you could fail. So here's the things that we'll be looking out for to assure that you do not do, and you in turn have to do the same thing, to not bring disregard and disrepute to the name of not just yourself, but the role of the king and of the people that are part of that. And I think that's a fascinating concept. I think it's something that is absolutely missing in politics, right? In democracy. We don't know any of these people. They all look and sound the same. They all speak the same. They're all trained to speak the same way. So in order for us to be able to levy our own gasa on these people, you would have to know them intimately. And failing to know them intimately, you cannot hold them to these certain standards, right? So I think any person that's looking for a position of power in Ireland would naturally have to accept these. They would have to have their own individually tailored gasa imposed upon them, and they would have to agree to them. Okay. And now there's another one as well, that it's from Cú Chulainn. Okay. And now Cú Chulainn had a couple of these put on him. He had more than two, right? But I'm just going to talk about two for a second, because I think it's indicative of where we are as a people at the moment as well. One of them was that he could not eat the meat of a dog, right? So he got his name as the Hound of Coolin, right? So from slaying Coolin's hound, he stood in his place to be the man's protector up until the point where he got a new dog. So naturally enough, Irish people tend not to eat dog meat either. Like, so this nearly stands for Irish people as a whole, right? But he's not allowed to eat the meat of a dog, nor is he allowed, which is common for nearly all of these kings and all of these heroes, they're not allowed to refuse hospitality. Okay? So in this part of Cú Chulainn's story, in the death of Cú Chulainn, he's heading off to fight, right? It's interesting as well that he's heading off to fight the Irish men, or the men of Ireland, right, who seem to have come under the sway of Queen Maeve. I'll get back to that another time, right? But that's just an interesting one. And he's from Ulster as well, right? But besides the point. So Cú Chulainn's on his way, right? on his own. He has refused to wait for support. He's gone out to fight on his own. He understands. He's seen a few omens that would indicate that this is his final day. These will be his final acts. Okay, and he's okay with that. So he's walking along, and after a while he saw 3 hags, and they blind of the left eye before him on the road. And they, having a venomous hound, they were cooking with charms on rods of the rowan tree. And he was going by them, for he knew it was not for his good they were there. But one of the hags called to him, "Stop a while with us, Cú Chulainn." "I will not stop with you," he said. "That is because we have nothing better than a dog to give you," said the hag. "If we had a grand, big cooking heart, you would stop and visit us. But because it is only a little we have to offer you, you will not stop. But he that will not show respect for the small, though he is great, he will get no respect himself." Right, so Cú Chulainn's caught in a bind here. On the one hand, he can refuse hospitality and not eat with the hags, the lowliest, right? In which case he would be breaking his gasa and lose his power, lose his respect, and lose his prestige. His name would be slandered, essentially. But if he is to accept their hospitality, he will have to eat of a dog, which is another gasa, which is imposed upon him, which is to destroy his name, is to sully his name as the Hound of Coolin, right? Is to eat the dog. So he's caught in a bind, right? And I think this is where Irish people are at the moment, so, or where we're coming out of, at least anyway. And these are things that we have to reckon with. And this is, again, I think the genius of Irish mythology is Irish nature. Human nature tends not to change, right? I would imagine that the psyche of a man is not that much different than it was 100 years ago or 500 years ago, with the same human failings and human strivings, right, and human shortcomings. And some are peculiar to different peoples, right? So the Irish we want to be seen as good people. We want to be good hosts, and we don't want to be seen as antisocial in some way, right? Or not fitting in. He's no crack, that kind of thing, right? We still say it. You can't have a buzz with him. He's, a bit dry, whatever. But that's the same sort of thing. So Cú Chulainn's caught in a bind. He can refuse hospitality, or he can break the taboo and eat the dog. He chooses to eat the dog because that's seen as the lesser of two evils, right? Which would elevate being seen as a great man, which Cú Chulainn was, a hero, right? Even in his own time. It was more important for him to be seen as not refusing to spend time with people who are explicitly stating that we know we're way beneath you or we're lesser than you. But it was more important for him to still take the time to spend with the lowliest of people. And I believe that's gone out of a lot of Irish people, and I will get to that in another. That's a topic for another moment, right? Because I'm seeing that failing over the last few days. But again, I think where this echoes Irish people, or when today echoes this story from Irish people, or where it echoes it, is where we're bent over a barrel, right? So either we are seen as hospitable to people who need it, we are seen as shelter givers for those who have nothing, or we can refuse to host people and be seen as racist, right? To be seen as pounding your chest and sticking your head above people that are worse off than you are, as Cú Chulainn demonstrated in that story, right? He was not willing to do that. He was willing to suffer the curse of eating the dog meat rather than to be seen as thinking himself above other people. This is the absolute curse that Irish people must come to terms with, right? And that is, so what if people think you're one way, right? You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You can either be seen as hospitable to the point of having no home to share with anybody, or you can be considered racist for imagining yourself to be more important than other people who are worse off than you are. The genius of Irish storytelling. It's all captured. Thousands and thousands of years of overcoming and wrestling with our own darkness, right? Wrestling with our own Irish minds. We have many, many stories to tell, and we have many, many stories that once you begin to read between the lines of them and not take them so literally, because they're clearly nonsense when taken literally. When you read between the lines of what our ancestors have handed down to us, there's still medicine there for the mind and the soul in today's day and age. And I think they're wholly applicable. And there's many, many answers as well in these stories. So I would suggest, for what it's worth, give them a go.